Hi, this is Drake. Just gonna pretty much do like a book haul sort of video. It's gonna be really low intensity and not very valuable knowledge-wise, but nonetheless, I'll just go ahead and talk about some books I got over Christmas because I've been earning a lot of money through work and I spoiled myself pretty much. So I'll pretty much just go through the books I got and why I got them, and then maybe read a little bit of poetry or talk about the books I've been reading because it's been 2 months. But part of the reason it's been so long is I did a podcast in November about Fernando Pessoa with one of my friends. He's from Brazil, Pedro. So I'll put a link to that in the description. But the first book I have here, I'm not sure if you'll be able to read because my ceiling light went out. So I just have my reading lamp and it's not very bright. But this is the Columbia Anthology of Traditional Chinese Literature. And as you can see, it's 1,300 pages. And the reason I got this is because I can't remember what got me into Chinese writing. But so I got this because I just want to get a good idea of Chinese literature, just in general. And I just got it today, so I haven't had too much time to look at it. But I was reading some of the Oracle Bones, like the prophecies that they wrote on those, and it's pretty neat. But before that, yeah, I cannot remember what got me into it, but it was like 2 months ago. And I got the selected poems of Po Chui and Li Po, who is the most famous. I didn't get any by Tu Fu, just haven't yet. I plan on it. But Li Po and Tu Fu are considered the two best from that era, the Tang Dynasty. And then Po Chui is one of the most prolific. And Po Chui, supposedly, he would read his poems to one of his servants or someone he knew, and if there was any part of it they didn't understand, he would rewrite it so that they, did eventually understand it. And I don't know, I just feel like in contrast, like if you take these Chinese poets at the time they were writing around 800 AD, and if you look at Western literature at that time, it's just a joke, the comparison, because yeah, we have Beowulf, and like that's decent. I mean, whatever. People may like it a lot, but we have Beowulf, and I don't know, the Nibelungenlied. I think that comes from that era, but it's just nothing. There's nothing even close to these Chinese poets. And then another book I got today is Essays in Idleness and the Hojoki. Here it is. And the first one, I guess the second one I said, Hojoki, but the first one in the book, it's called Record of a 10-Foot Square Hut. And this guy had had enough of being in a city and everything going wrong, so he went and built himself a hut in the woods. And he lived there until he died. And then the second one is just pretty much a selection of thoughts, essays in idleness. He was bored and he just wrote essays. But let me see. I marked a couple pages. There was one page I marked because it was pretty much the same thing as Deja Vu. Oh yeah, here. I like this section. This was the 71st essay. As soon as I hear someone's name, I feel I can picture their face. But when I actually meet them, no one ever looks as I had been imagining them all the time. Also, I wonder if everyone on hearing some old tale imagined it as taking place in a certain part of some house he knows, and identifies the characters with people he sees in life, as I do. And is it just I who sometimes feels a conviction that what someone is saying, or what you're seeing or thinking just then, has already happened before, though you cannot remember when? So that's like deja vu, but so it's just those little things, just little like things you notice whenever you have too much time to yourself. But and that one was published in like 1200s, and if you compare what's around the 1200s in Western culture, I mean, you do have the troubadour stuff, which is good. It is very good, but I just don't think it compares, honestly, as far as the continuity from that time to today, what we write about today. And then, so apart from that, the Chinese stuff I've been interested in, I did get some books of 20th century Chinese ink painting, and those are really cool, but those are elsewhere. And then the last book I got today, I got 3 books today, is Lucretius, The Nature of Things. And part of the reason I got this is because I've been interested in more ancient stuff. I keep hearing about stuff being referenced in Virgil's Georgics, so, and I do have that already. I've been skimming through it, but I saw a video by Stephen Greenblatt, I think his name is, and I guess he thinks that that one clerk discovering, the De Rerum Natura, the Lucretius, was the thing that started modern culture. So, and I've heard it's also a really good book, just in general. And coincidentally, this translator, A.E. Stallings, or Alicia Stallings, she's a good poet on her own. She has good poetry on Poetry Foundation, that website. And apart from those, I've read 1 book for each day of 2017 so far. Now that won't continue, but so the first day I read Pedro Paramo by Juan Rulfo, and that one was very good. I did save some excerpts on my Kindle, but I was kind of skeptical that that one would be as good as people say it was. People always say it's the best Mexican novel or something like that, and it's only, I think, 100 pages, my edition that I read, and I am working on it in Spanish too. I'm only on page 30 in Spanish. I had to restart because I was reading it in Spanish and I had gotten ahead of myself, and I just couldn't remember where I was at. So I read it in English, and now I'm restarting it in Spanish. And let's see. Oh yeah, I saved one section because it's here. I'll read it. It says, "And high overhead the paper bird would tumble and somersault, trailing its rag tail until it disappeared into the green earth." So I was wondering if that's where he got his YouTube channel name, Paper Bird, but I'm sure it comes from something else. But the thing that I thought was neat was, it seemed like, to me, I don't know if I'd put money on it, but Miyazaki's film Spirited Away, I really feel like it was very similar to Pedro Paramo. At least in the feel, and in Pedro Paramo, he goes to a town, Comala, that his mom had told him to visit after she died, to visit his father. But in fact, he goes there, and he has like a weird way of getting there. But he goes there and he finds out that it's a ghost town, and the first person he meets there is actually dead, and it continues that way. And I don't know, it was very interesting because at first it seems empty, but then he starts, hearing voices and it becomes progressively more populated. And it's interesting. It's a very good book. I'm going to read it again, definitely. Well, of course, I'm going to read it in Spanish still, but. And then the other book I read, the second one I read this year, is The Return, which is a collection of short stories by Roberto Bolaño. And the only other Bolaño thing I've read is I listened to the first 4 parts of 2666, an audiobook, in the audiobook form, because I would listen to it when I was going to work and to school, because on the average day when I have school, I would drive like at least an hour, if not an hour and a half to 2 hours, so I had a lot of time to listen to audiobooks, and I listened to most of it. I don't know why I stopped. I honestly can't say, but I've heard the last part is very good, so I'll probably read that one in print. But the Return, the story this collection's named after, is very good. Again, I was skeptical because it's so short. I think it's something like 15 pages or 10 pages or something, but it was definitely the best in the collection. But the one I did really like that I thought he did really well it's called Detectives, and it's, I think, the 34th story. And it's just pretty much dialogue between 2 guys. But I mean, I can just read the first part. It gives you a good feel of it. What kind of weapons do you like? Any kind, except for blades. You mean knives, razors, daggers, corvos, switchblades, penknives, that sort of thing? Yeah, more or less. What do you mean, more or less? It's just a figure of speech, asshole. I don't like any of that stuff. You sure? Yes, I'm sure. But how can you not like corvos? I just don't, that's all. But you're talking about our national weapon. So the corvo is Chile's national weapon. Knives in general, I mean. Come off it, compadre. I swear to God, I read it in an article the other day. And it pretty much continues in that whole way. And one interesting thing about Bolaño is he's like self-inserts, Arturo Belano. But even in the last story, he does actually put Bolaño in it. So his own name. So I think that one's pretty neat. But it's a very good collection overall. It's definitely worth the money you have to pay, and then it's 200 something pages, so it goes pretty quick as far as that goes too. And then I went up to Denton to the bookstore up there, which is a very good bookstore, and I got a Rosario Castellanos reader. And she was a female modernist in Mexico, and the only thing I had been able to find online was a couple of her poems, but I think this one should be good. I haven't looked too much into it yet. I was interested in it. Well, I always hear people say, oh, I need to get more diverse. I need to read more female authors. I don't really go out of my way to do that, ever, because I generally just am a curious person. But the more authors I read, the better. So I got this one. I haven't read too much of it yet, like I said, though, so to be announced. And then another one I bought because Herman Melville is one of my favorite authors, is this poetry collection, Or the Ambiguities, by Karen Weiser, I guess, be Americanized. But if you can see how she writes these, it's very interesting. See how she does it, like on the top it's straight, like a straight sentence, and then it just trickles down, and then at the bottom it does the same thing, and I can read it Our mirrors were covered. There were strangers in our house all day long. And then it goes like, mirror recovered. Here, rest. Sin, house a day on. And then it trickles down to where it goes, you mirror over, rest, sin, you house, a yawn. And then the bottom one is outline of Pierre, but now strangely filled with features transformed and unfamiliar too. And then out of Pierre, but now strangely led the rest formed and familiar too. So it's interesting how she takes out some letters and it ends up being like a different poem. And of course, the reason she named it Or the Ambiguities is because Herman Melville's book was Pierre or the Ambiguities. So she got inspiration from that. But this is by the Ugly Duckling Press, which is a pretty good press. I'm not able to buy many of their books because they're expensive. And then another one I got a little while ago, because I had read a lot of Paul Valéry. I say that like I'm Russian, but I don't know how to say it. I read his poetry before, but then online I read part of his Monsieur Test series, or not series, but collection. And so this is it. This is the Yale Bollingen thing, but it's very expensive. For this short book, like 150 pages, it was, I don't want to say how much it was, but it was a lot. But it was worth it because I've been looking at it for like over a year now, and it has not gotten cheap. So, but I'll read the beginning of it, and I don't know, I'll just let you get the impression. This is called The Evening with Monsieur Test. Stupidity is not my strong point. I have seen many persons, I have visited several countries, I have taken part in various enterprises without liking them, I have eaten nearly every day, I have had women, I can now recall a few hundred faces, 2 or 3 great spectacles, and the substance of perhaps 20 books. I have not retained the best nor the worst of these things. What could stay with me did. Such arithmetic spares me any surprise at growing old. I could also count up the victorious moments of my mind and imagine them joined and blended, composing a happy life. But I think I have always been a good judge of myself. I have rarely lost sight of myself. I have detested and adored myself. So, we have grown old together. So I think that's gives you a good idea of the tone of it, but Monsieur Test is an interesting character. He described him as a man who has killed his puppet. And another interesting idea from that story that I read is all of the greatest authors would be people who never published anything, because to be great would mean that you didn't have to show yourself, because showing yourself in and of itself is a weakness. Having to prove yourself to other people or something like that. And I think it's interesting how many authors we have who like told to burn their works and never publish anything or whatever, like Kafka. And then there is a story by Nathaniel Hawthorne, which apparently Herman Melville was connected with, and it's about fragments of the Journal of a Solitary Man, and he talks about how he burned all of his other works, but the guy kept his journal, and then the story is fragments of his journal, but it's a very interesting story. It's pretty short too. And it's one of the only Nathaniel Hawthorne works I've liked. And then, where to next? And then the other book I've been working on gradually is Tristram Shandy, The Life and Opinions of Tristram Shandy. I got this when I was in Santa Fe at the bookstore there. And I had no idea how funny this was. I thought it was going to be one of those uptight, like, I don't know, you always hear about like Pamela or whatever, like the longest book and it's so boring, or I really don't like Victorian novels and like Henry James and stuff, and I thought it was going to be like that except 100 years older, but it is the exact opposite of everything I thought. It is so funny. It is so funny. Like I read easily 60 pages in a day, which is the first volume. And interestingly enough, I I read that first volume, and then me and my friend are doing a read of Moby Dick. I've already read it once, but it was a poor reading, and I'm reading it again. And I started reading it again, and I was like, I told my friend, I was like, I swear I would bet $1 million that Herman Melville had been reading Tristram Shandy before he wrote Moby Dick. And sure enough, I looked at an article on JSTOR that said in a journal in 1849 he had been reading Tristram Shandy, because the similarities are just, they're obvious. It's just completely obvious. But yeah, I love Tristram Shandy. I mean, it's hilarious. I can't even believe it was made in 1758. I think it was published. I can't believe it. It's hilarious. I want to read every book that was inspired by Tristram Shandy now. It has just such like a force of character in it. And then I've been reading. I read Hyperion by Frederick Hölderlin, and I loved it. I read that in a couple days only, and then I got his Selected Poems and Fragments, the Penguin edition, which coincidentally is translated by my favorite translator of Paul Celan. But this is the poem that Michael Hamburger, the guy who translates Celan and Hölderlin, which coincidentally Hölderlin was one of Paul Celan's favorite poets. But this is the poem he says is one of Hölderlin's most important. It's called Remembrance. The northeasterly blows of winds the dearest to me because of fiery spirit and happy voyage it promises mariners. But go now, go and greet the beautiful Garonne and the gardens of Bordeaux, to where on the rugged bank the path runs, and into the river deep falls the brook, but above them a noble pair of oaks and white poplars look out. Still well I remember this, and how the elmwood with its great leafy tops inclines towards the mill, but in the courtyard a fig tree grows. On holidays there too the brown women walk on silken ground. In the month of March, when night and day are equal, and over slow footpaths, heavy with golden dreams, lulling breezes drift. But someone pass me the fragrant cup, full of the dark light, so that I may now rest. For sweet it would be to drowse amid shadows. It is no good to be soulless with mortal thoughts, but good is converse, and to speak the heart's opinion, to hear many tales about the days of love and deeds that have occurred. But where are the friends? Where Bellarmine and his companion? Many a man is shy of going to the source, for wealth begins in the sea, and they, like painters, bring together the beautiful things of the earth, and do not disdain winged war, and to live in solitude for years beneath the defoliate mast, where through the night do not gleam the city's holidays, nor the music of strings, nor indigenous dancing. But now to Indians those men have gone, there on the airy peak, on grape-covered hills, where down the Dordogne comes, and together with the glorious Garonne, as wide as the sea, the current sweeps out. But it is the sea that takes and gives remembrance, and love no less keeps eyes attentively fixed. But what is lasting the poets provide. I messed up a lot on that one, but Hölderlin is very good. And also he had an interesting life. He went to school with Hegel, and funnily enough, the first philosophy essay that Hegel had done, like seriously had done, he had used an idea of Hölderlin. And so he got his start in philosophy by copying a poet. But that shows you how smart Hölderlin was. But when he was in his mid-30s, he, to the outside world, lost his mind, and he got in his friend's house and ended up just staying there for the rest of his life. And people would come to his house and steal little trinkets for souvenirs and have him write them little poems. It was a sad life at the end, but the whole is what matters. And then also, after I did my Pessoa podcast with my friend, he was recommending me other Portuguese poets, specifically Brazilian. And he recommended me Carlos Drummond de Andrade. This is the one by Richard Zenith, who is the same translator of the Pessoa that we quote in the podcast. And I think I can just give I'll just give an example of this one here. Alright, I think this is a pretty good one. It's called The Moth. In this city of Rio, home to 2 million people, I'm alone in my room. I'm alone in America. Am I really alone? Just now a sound announced life at my side. Not human life, true, but it's life. And I feel the moth caught in the zone of light. 2 million people, and I wouldn't need that much. I just need a friend, one of those quiet, distant friends who reads Horace, but secretly influence our lives, our loves, our flesh. I'm alone, without a friend, and at this late hour, how can I find one? And I wouldn't need that much. I just need a woman to be here, this minute, to accept this affection and save from annihilation the mad minute of mad affection I have to offer. Among 2 million people, how many women must be staring in the mirror, counting up the lost years until morning arrives, with milk, the paper, some calm? But how can I find a woman at this desolate hour? This city of Rio! I'm full of tender words. I know animal sounds. I know the wildest kisses. I've traveled, fought, and learned. I'm surrounded by eyes, by hands, affections, yearnings. But if I try to reach out, there's nothing but night and a frightful solitude. Companions, hear me. That agitated presence trying to break through the night isn't just the moth. It's the softly panting secret of a man. Then there's also a fun one by Drummond. It's a pretty funny one. If I can find it. Oh yeah, here it is. It's called Square Dance. And whenever I read this, I thought for sure he had read Pessoa, or at least he has a very similar feeling to Pessoa. João loved Teresa, who loved Raimundo, who loved Maria, who loved Joaquim, who loved Lily, who didn't love anyone. João went to the United States, Teresa to a convent, Raimundo died in an accident, Maria became a spinster, Joaquim committed suicide, and Lily married J. Pinto Fernandes, who had nothing to do with the story. So that's Drummond, as they call him, I think. And he's very good, obviously. And then I guess I'll just talk about 2 last ones, because I think this is going on for a while. I don't know how long exactly, because I didn't look at the clock beforehand, but luckily at the bookstore in Denton, I got this collection of Browning's poetical works, and I had been looking for one of these that has Sordello, because Sordello is about a troubadour in the Divine Comedy, who's mentioned in the Divine Comedy. I believe in the Purgatorio, and Ezra Pound said Sordello was the last great epic in English at the time that he had talked about it. And most collections don't publish Sordello because it was not a commercial success at all. I guess you could consider it like Moby Dick, where, it was like higher than the critics could handle. And so it was not looked upon well. So it's not in most like selected poems or Brownings or whatever. But luckily this one has it because it was published in 1970, Oxford University Press. And I don't know. I've been reading parts of it, and I really do like it. But it is complex. It's not an easy one, but that makes it all the better. And then, like I said, I've been reading Moby Dick because I got the Library of America edition for I think it was like $6. Because I think on Amazon they have this thing where they clear them out. Like when they get down to one book, they want to clear it out and buy a new batch. So they drop it really low to sell it. Because this is normally like $30 and it's a really good quality edition, but I got it for $6 new, like completely new. So I got lucky there. Then the last book I'm going to talk about is one that just came out, published by the Dalkey Archive, which is my favorite press, pretty much, between New Directions and the Dalkey Archive. And it's called November, and it was published in December. But I actually got it in November. I got it November 30th, because it was supposed to come out December 7th or something, but Amazon shipped it early. I guess they received it, and they were feeling generous. And I haven't read much of it yet, but the introduction is interesting. It's something I've been thinking about a lot recently, how you, maybe this is just me, but I always have an inclination to plan books around interesting historical time periods like World War I, the Civil War, or like the night in Paris where they premiered the Rite of Spring. But this one here, book 1, Arriving, in which one man receives an unwelcome phone call, another oversleeps, a third gets a date with a girl, a fourth a long-awaited smile from his wife, while a fifth invokes and then experiences a vision. These men and others besides are brought safely to the factory where they work. We are on the continent of Europe, in the town of Day 9, November 1976, when nobody famous gave up the ghost and no great war began or ended. For all that, things never stopped happening. And from that, I can see it as a modernist sort of continuation. Because, you have James Joyce, some random day in 1906, I think, 1905, whenever Bloom's Day is, whatever. And then like Proust, Remembrance of Things Past, it's just some guy remembering stuff. And then The Man Without Qualities, that one is set the year before World War I, so doesn't really count, I suppose, but it just talks about the everyday stuff that everyone goes through. And I have a great respect for that sort of thing. Looking at the minuscule events in everyone's life. And coincidentally, that's what these Chinese poets, that's what they focus on pretty much. It's just like almost mundane experiences. Let me see if I can get a couple from Li Po, because he's very good. Okay, here's a good one. It's called Ancient Song. Cheng Tzu dreams he's a butterfly, and a butterfly becomes Cheng Tzu. All transformation this one body, boundless occurrence goes on and on. It's no surprise eastern seas become western streams, shallow and clear. Or the melon grower at Qing Gate once reigned as Duke of Tungling. Are hopes and dreams any different? We bustle around, looking for what? Like, can you believe that? That was written in the 800s AD. Could you imagine if something like that was written in the Western literature at that same time? It would be considered the best book of the time. Where is it? Well, I don't want to look too long, but... Oh yeah, here, this is a good one. This is what I'm talking about. Farewell to a visitor returning east. Autumn rains ending in this river town, and wine gone, your lone sail soars away. Setting out across billows and waves, your family settles back for the journey home, past islands lavish with blooms ablaze, willow filigree crowding in over the banks. And after you're gone, nothing left to do, I go back and sweep off the fishing pier. Doesn't have to talk about wars, doesn't have to talk about nothing, just what he does. But anyway, I've been loving not going to school right now. I feel like less I go to school, the more time I'm able to teach myself stuff. Like, if I didn't go to school, I would be way ahead of wherever I am now. Because I went and talked to my American literature teacher, and I was just talking with her just in general. And I said that I originally had wanted to go into like literature studies, either in English or comparative literature or something else, Spanish literature. And I said I had decided not to, but she was really encouraging me to. And I feel like I could do it pretty easily, honestly. I don't want to try to seem like I'm bragging, but from what I can tell, I read more than I need to. And I've thought about it, but I just don't really like that academic sort of like Freudian analysis or queer theory or all that stuff. Like, I just hate it all pretty much. But I do love reading, so who knows? I do plan on becoming like a translator of Spanish work right now, but I've decided to learn German next. I'm going to be signing up for classes either the second half of this semester or in the summer. Definitely the summer. But looking like good shape. But yeah, now I'm going to read more. If you made it this far, thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button. Anyway, bye.